Yes. So questions?
I dropped a question in the chat and I just want to speak to it. I've been living in the UK for quite some time now, and I've observed it, and I've spoken with some people who are Jamaicans and Caribbeans, and even at the onset of these are networks, they want to be members, but if you don't call it black, they don't want to be part of it. And I'm just worried because you're a Jamaican. I'm just worried what could have happened. You know, what conversation among the Jamaicans or in the soft community would have led to this great hatred or harbor among majority to associate with Africa and to you know, like for instance, in a school where I worked, and they call it a cultural day, and the students from Africa and other places put on their African dresses and everything, but the Jamaicans or the Caribbeans, they just don't just want to, and they just don't want to even say, this is beautiful, this is, and this disconnect is great. What could be responsible for this, and how do we really intervene? Or have we committed any crime as Africans, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the reality of it is, Jamaicans, right? Here's the thing. Here's the one of the major issues that we have with Jamaicans. Jamaicans were some of the most resilient Africans when slavery was at its peak. You had Queen Nanny of the Maroons, and I don't know if you're aware of her, but her story is powerful. You know, the legacy that she left in Jamaica. So Jamaicans, there are many nationals born there, raised there, and who have been exposed to the history. But because Jamaica is a Caribbean island, and Jamaican culture was commercialized in the very early in the early 60s, and you can thank Bob Marley for that. And this is why I'm really you know, those of us who are truly conscious thinking pro-blacks, we're not big fans of Bob Marley because first and foremost, Bob Marley, he was mixed race. He was not a black man. His father was a white man, and his message was not in alignment with anything the Honorable Messiah Marcus Garvey used to teach. Marcus Garvey Marcus Garvey's teachings and what Bob Marley preached in his music, they did not align. But white people, they embraced Bob Marley, and they put Bob Marley on a pedestal because, you know, he was the son of a white man essentially, and he was very cultured and he had the peace, love message, you know, the peace and love for the world. But that wasn't what Marcus Garvey was spearheading. So that ushered in, Bob Marley ushered in a way in which Jamaican culture could be commercialized. So because Jamaican culture is probably the most commercialized culture outside of the African continent, everywhere in the world, people recognize the Jamaican flag, people recognize Jamaican music. Jamaican music genres have been commercialized pretty much everywhere. Now, even in West Africa, there's a lot of collaborations between Afrobeat artists and bashment artists. So Jamaicans developed a sense of national pride very early when we were given independence back in the 60s. And because of that, you have a people that are fragmented relative to the objective cultural principles that should have been preserved and cultivated by way of our ancestral knowledge. And that's something that many of us, we left that responsibility to the Rastafarians. Now, Rastafarians do not reject their African heritage. They embrace it far more than anybody in Jamaica. That's quite commonly known. which is why you find Rastaman in Africa today. Rastafarianism is global, and Jamaicans have played a huge role in globalizing Rastafarianism. But then you also have those of Jamaicans who are Christian, and the Christians, a lot of the Christians in Jamaica don't identify, they don't culturally connect with the Rastafarians. So because of that, there's a divide even amongst Jamaicans, and you've got those Jamaicans who want to center and cultivate Jamaican culture through biblical teachings, rather than looking to which I have no. I mean, I myself, I'm all for that. I was brought up in that. I'm a believer in the Word of God. But that's a whole nother discussion. From a standpoint of being culturally rooted to your ancestry, that's something that we failed to make a national objective cultural standard. So you have, believe it or not, a lot of Jamaicans who are, you would think, are very culturally aware and culturally conscious, but they're actually far more Western Europeanized than you think. And because of that Western Europeanized Jamaican psyche, it's almost as though it neutralizes and there's a detachment from what Jamaican culture is actually rooted in. And so it's not as though anything specifically occurred. Again, I'll go back to ignorance, and being willingly ignorant of that. And Jamaicans, you know, it exists amongst us, unfortunately. And there are certain social behaviors that have been normalized here in the UK by our grandparents' generation, because it was the very first time, like back in the 80s, where Caribbeans and Africans were once again becoming familiar with each other, you know, and it wasn't, the UK was never a society which would truly facilitate that. It was never going to be that nation, you know, that sees the Black community thriving with the diversity in our tribal ethnicity and cultural traditions. It was never going to be that. So, but one thing I will say is we've certainly come a long way. We've come a long way, and you do see a lot more cultural, the way in which we interact and we essentially embrace each other. There's a lot more of a significant recognition of our cultural roots being mutually shared in our African ancestry. I do see a lot more of that occurring, but yeah, there's certainly still room for improvement and further realization of who we are as a people.
Thank you. Any other question? For either of our presenters, Brother Shabazz and Brother Akeem.
My question for Brother Shabazz has to do with the ongoing conversation among some Africans too, that towards reconciliation, towards unity, and you know, the avoidance of this so-called Black racism. You know, this whole idea of interpreting history in a way that seems not to embody some form of reconciliation, like changing the concept of slave trade to war, for instance, or trying to provide more evidence for the ills of the past instead of pointing reference to some amendments that has been made and how the diaspora or how this Western nation has also been a fertile ground for some people to actualize their potentials. So that's one of the major things I just want him to see from his presentation, how we can create a balance, because it seems to be tilted to one side. And, you know, in this conversation, there are people who are like who are after a kind of a reconciliation, a kind of a forward-looking thing, when we have a world in which we'll all be happy and, like Bob Marley will say, or is it Bob Marley or what's his name? This one from South Africa. Lucky Dube will say that white man, a black man becomes my brother, and white man, black man is not my enemy, and then different people want color. That's how do you actualize such vision, Brother Kwame?
I don't. It's a crazy idea. It just defies you said you said people are looking forward to something that's more where we all get along. And looking forward, anyone who's looking critically at the forward thing, I think it's pretty obvious that reconciliation is not even close to being a reality. The reality is, if you're talking about UK, if you're talking about France, talking about Canada, you're talking about United States, they require the subjugation of African people. Why? Because they need Africa's resources. Now, what you said is true. There will be a small minority of Black people who are here and they've got an opportunity, they got fancy cars, they have a house, a nice family, but that's not the majority. That's not the masses. The masses will always be suffering because the Western world requires the subjugation of Black people. The only thing that's going to change that, in my opinion, and I admit my assessment is quite dire, but I think it's a reality. In my opinion, we are engaged in an ongoing war that Black people are slow to realize. And until we get a warrior mentality and understand that we're in a struggle for our survival, this mess that we're in will persist. In fact, Europeans rely upon our ability, they want us to have some sort of unreasonable hope in Black people and white people coming together and holding hands and sharing the wealth.
Yeah.
But the reality is, anytime a Black person has said something like, Dr. King said that. Dr. King said, let's distribute the wealth equally. We have to fight white supremacy. He was organizing a poor people's march. He was challenging capitalism. The United States government organized or conspired to kill him. And that's true for any leader, wherever they were, whether you're talking about in Grenada, what was the brother's name? I'm looking up Walter Rodney. Wherever you are, if a Black person raised a critique about redistributing the wealth equally, they were taken out. That's the reality. And we just have to, I think a lot of us are in La La Land or some fantasy world where we think this is going to change because our individual lives are, we're comfortable, we can pay our bills, but that's not, Africa is suffering. I've been to Africa, and most Africans are suffering. That's the truth. We have to be honest about that. The healthcare is horrible for the average. The leaders they fly to Europe if they're sick. That's the reality for most Africans. They can't afford to fly. They got to deal with, but having said that, there is still, even in the villages, and especially, there's still so much we can learn in terms of our ability to survive going forward, right? For example, some of these villages don't have police. They don't have prisons. They don't have police officers, but they manage, right? They somehow organize themselves to police themselves. So there's so much we can learn. They're not eating all this junk food that we eat. There's so much we can learn from our brothers and sisters in the villages. But the first lesson I think we have to take to heart is that this situation is not going to change for the masses of Black people. You're going to have a small group of people who are comfortable, Black people who are comfortable, who reproduce this idea, this fantasy that somehow we're making progress when we're not. We're going, in some ways, in the United States, we're going backwards, in fact. Some scholars or some economists have estimated that African-American wealth will reach zero. We'll have zero wealth by 2050. So we're in fact going backwards. But we don't see it because our minds are still enchained, or our minds are still enslaved by the people who are subjugating us. We have to free our minds. We have the long way to go in terms of that effort. So that's my answer. I don't think it's realistic. If we're really forward looking, we can see the writing on the wall. These people will either subjugate us or destroy us because it's required. And that's just a stone cold truth, whether we like it or not.
And my question, okay.
But yeah, so the question is then, I think it's just a follow-up, to Brother Augustine's point. So the question is though, how can we free ourselves when those at the top, the orgas on top, are not pushing that agenda of freedom in many African spaces? I understand there's, Thomas Sankara, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Stephen Biko, etc., or even we could say even Robert Mugabe, right? But when that effort is being pushed, it's usually they get killed. So so how can we? So at least on the African continent, I'm thinking, or even in the United States, we have Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, who was also in the United States. And so my point is then, how can we, because I think it is important for us to have self-determination, but then the people, and I think the people on ground really, they want to be free. I mean, generally speaking, that is.
Doubt about that. But I don't know. Brother Akeem is right. I don't know a lot about the UK situation, and I I've been to the Africa a lot, West Africa. I really don't understand the Caribbean situation. But when Akeem talks, he sounds like my brother from another mother, and so I really like to hear. I'd be curious to hear what Akeem has to say on this point.
So, please, question again, please.
Oh, it's about self-determination, because we have all these, it's not as if, it does seem as though, even though, it does seem as, let me clarify, it does seem as though that there's a desire to some extent for some of us to be free.
Right.
With ourselves and have self-determination. But then there's also a pull of, from white supremacy that is trying to bring us down because it needs to survive. It needs air. In order for it to have air, it has to push us down. And then there are also a subset of us, based on your presentation, right, who are happy to be at the table. Even Brother Shaka's presentation alluded to that. Well, I'm happy to be at the table. They don't want to speak up.
Yes, I mean,
because they finally arrived. They're eating with the white man or the white woman.
And I think now, I mean, even just in the last 10 years, I've actually seen it get worse. I will state that I think the illusion of inclusion has advanced in ways that the psychosocial conditioning is becoming more intense, and we're exposed to it even more. Again, going back to I say it from this standpoint because I'm a digital specialist. So me being very aware of how hands-on people are with social media, and we're all content consumers, and that's also another major problem for us as Black people, because many of us don't really know what content to be consuming. We've got time to sit down and watch Netflix and to watch Black people in America want to watch the Super Bowl, they want to watch NBA. Black people here, we want to watch the UEFA League. There's just so much in which we're distracted. We don't internalize the realities of the captivity that we still remain in. So we as conscious thinking Black people need to acknowledge the collective state. It's one thing for us as individuals, but there's no undoing. There is no undoing, collectively undoing the systematic dehumanization that took place on those plantations, and even in certain parts of Africa, because a lot of people are not aware that there were actually plantations in the continent of Africa. The very same methods of stripping the Negro of their African psyche, it has been imposed onto us worldwide, wherever we coexist amongst white people. So I'll give Brother Shabazz certainly that credit relative to that fact, which I certainly agree with. And at this point, it's not just it's not just there's not simply a need for us to acknowledge this reality about white people, but we also are in more need now, I believe, now more than ever, to acknowledge the state of our own people and the state that we are collectively in, and the state of our collective consciousness, because there are too many white black people who are they support white supremacy. Nobody is supporting white supremacy more than black people now. So that's where we truly have to shift our focus, and we have to be prepared to challenge those amongst our own. And I don't see enough of that. I don't see enough of that occurring. I don't see enough black men checking other black men, black women checking other black women. I don't think that we're making our own uncomfortable. We have to adopt a mindset which demonstrates an attitude to our own that is truly unapologetic. We cannot be prepared to demonstrate who we are unapologetically only towards white people or those who oppress us. It needs to be also directly to those who are allowing those very same people to benefit from our oppression. And as Brother Shaka Hislop said, your silence, is almost as though you're playing an active role now. Simply with your silence, you are playing an active role, and that's where we need to shift the way in which we are taking a stance on what we are for and what we are against. This is not going to be our culture, or this is not going to be something in which we are going to uphold as a tradition anymore, because it's dysfunctional and it's rooted in dysfunctional behavior. There are certain aspects of Jamaican culture which I certainly think should be done away with, and and then there's also certain aspects of just traditional African behaviors that really are tribal. It's tribalism. These behaviors that we're still practicing today, and in some places it's on such an extreme level. If you throw religion into the mix, you ended up with people dead. Look at what took place in the Catholic Church, in the Fulani herdsmen, the Nigerian Muslims who murdered 40 people in a church. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So we need to, yes, we can point the finger at white people. We can, the white man is this, the white man is that, white people this, white people that, all day. But then we have to also recognize that there is the need for us to spearhead change amongst ourselves, and to an extent impose. It needs to be superimposed with those who are set in their ways. They're fixed in beliefs and behaviors and attitudes, and it's consuming us and preventing us from coming into a realization of self collectively. And I believe that we will never be able, we are not carnal minded. We were never a carnal minded people. It will never be in our nature to set off nuclear warheads and to commit mass acts of genocide and to wipe out natural wildlife and plant life. That's not our nature. We're just simply going to have to leave the white man to those acts of carnal minded existence, and the way in which Europeans seek to thrive. We need to reconnect with the true nature of who we are as Africans, and that needs to be promoted. It needs to be rebranded. It needs to be advanced, and not alone. And I believe if we truly committed to that, and did so more so globally. Now we're talking, speaking of the diaspora, if it was truly a global diaspora effort, that alone would see significant change. It would truly bring about significant change for us. It would truly advance Black empowerment. It would see the diaspora thrive from economic standpoint. We're talking about social, political, economic agendas that will truly empower us and facilitate not only Black people thriving, but Black people less conflict amongst us and division amongst us. Eliminating the xenophobia. Eliminating even the conflict between those who may not those of us who may not share the same religion, because there should be a certain level of intellectual rationale that we demonstrate towards each other, and as Africans, there's no excuse for not demonstrating a reasonable approach that's diplomatic and that's truly committed to cultivating who we are as a people. So, yeah, in your response to your question, I think that's my outlook. That's what I truly believe.
Thank you. Do we have any other question?
Could I just say briefly? I pretty much concur with King's point. I would just add that. So when I was talking, I always reiterated our mental slavery, psychological, and that how white people have infected how we're thinking. So yeah, I agree that there's that we have to take that responsibility on ourselves to change, and getting to responding to Yokyam's point, right? It's not going to be easy. It's going to be it's going to be extremely difficult to get out of this mess, and that's just the reality. But struggle's a challenge, and we don't have any other options. And I think that maybe one ray of light is perhaps knowing our history. Our ancestors in Haiti and Jamaica and in the United States here, they fought and resisted under far more dire conditions. And so there's that. We can learn from and be hopeful and be encouraged by our faith in God and by our understanding of our history of struggle. We've done this before under much worse conditions. I did want to say briefly too, now we differ, I think it's important. He mentioned Bob Marley, and he said Bob Marley's not Black, he's biracial. I think African Americans have had a secret weapon. That secret weapon is the one-drop rule, right? So if you have any discernible trace of African ancestry, you are Black. And so
see, I would strongly disagree with that.
Let me finish. And so, yes, we have the problem of colorism and divisions within the African American community, but on the other hand, those groups, biracial groups that we call Black in the United States,
right,
unambiguous Black people that we call in the United States, for the most part, we've united in ways that wasn't possible in Latin America, where they don't have the one-drop rule. And you have all this, you have all these categories between right. Black and white. You might have 50 categories, and they're all divided amongst themselves. They can't consolidate. One thing, the secret weapon of Black people is the one-drop rule. We are able to consolidate all of those different identities into right. one identity, Black, and have a laser focus on challenging white supremacy.
Right. Now, you just mentioned a rule that white people created. The ancestors didn't create that rule. Second of all, you're speaking on an experience that has always been validated for mixed race people, specifically in the US, but it's not that here in the UK. If anything, it's becoming more of an issue. The identity complex, which is essentially predisposed when you're born of a Black parent and in most importantly a white parent, the identity complex and the way in which biracial people are conflicted in how they identify with both a European historical narrative, which is unapologetically European, and an African historical narrative, which is unapologetically African. Two cannot occur simultaneously in an individual when these identities are diametrically opposed. And that's not an opinion of mine, that is a historical fact. Black identity and white identity is diametrically opposed. So I would certainly be one who would feel encouraged to explore your dialogue further, because I don't entirely agree with mixed race people being a secret weapon. I think mixed race people can also be a liability. And I think that blanqueamento in itself is actually a form of spiritual and cultural suicide. So I mean, but I'm open to hear your thoughts. I'm open to hear your response essentially.
Yeah.
I'll defer because I know we have other questions.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think this conversation we could go for hours. I think Dr. Olivia has a comment to make. Oh, let me unmute. Okay, you're now.
It's done. Yeah, quite interesting following Brother Shabaz's conversation and Akim's. I have a few observations to make, and starting with the last one Akim made, I quite agree. And you find that for dual heritage, we're in PC world on our side, we don't say mixed race, but you find in dual heritage, depending who has had the strong influence, that's how the child will identify. And you're quite right, Akim, that there can be a liability, because if they haven't got kind of that strong identity, that's an issue. But also on the one hand, if they come up with, if we are pro-black or pro-African and they come in with white kind of views, then despite them being mixed, you then reject them. And if they go the other side, they get rejected. So they're quite, I think those are the most weakest point to, disarm us if we are kind of progressing. But that's just an observation I've just made. But I was just thinking in terms of unity.
I agree with that point, 100%.
Yeah. And going back to the unity, I've just been reflecting on the conversation with my teenage daughter. This is something I brought up in the first series about how do we, with our children in the diasporas, what identity do they have? When then in this household, they are African, not just African, you are the country, but when they're out, what are they? And what I've noticed, I think without them consciously even realizing they're doing it, when they're in school, those children who are black, whether they're from Jamaica, Africa, they tend to be together. They tend to share, which is funny, they tend to share their upbringing, the discipline, the food, the this, to the extent of making their white counterparts feel like not part of the group. And I don't think they do it unconsciously. Now, one of the observations I've noticed, and I'm going to be observing and seeing if there's a pattern, and I will address it with school, is a comment that whenever black children during lunch break or in the playground together in groups, teachers always come to kind of disperse them.
Yeah, that used to happen a lot to us when we was in school, because again, this is a white supremacist country and they don't like it. They don't want to see and teachers, another thing that they do as well, when you are going to fill in a form and you have to put your background, they specifically separate being Caribbean with being African and being or being Black British or Caribbean. So it's like you have to choose. And it's like some people will say they're Black British before they'll say they're Jamaican or before they'll say they're Nigerian. And you've got children, third generation Black children who are growing up here in the UK who will put Black British before anything on that form. And that is where the conditioning, and it does start in school. So that insight you just shared truly doesn't shock me.
So
Dr. Oliver, let me not cut you off. I think it's also similar to some extent with here in the United States. I'm thinking of historically. where when you see Black people congregated historically, or people of African descent, when they congregated, they're often looked after, sort of, or they're encouraged to not be, when they're crowded, you see the police. Even when you go to the hood, for example, when you see one or two or like 5 Black kids play, all of a sudden you see the police. And the other thing is that, one of my areas of expertise is it's Christian theology and missions. So there's even a story that stuck with me of African American Christianity. Historically, churches, Black churches, when they started forming churches on their own, those churches, you see 1 or 2 white people in those churches. They were not there just to worship. They're there as spies. Stuff. But anyway, sorry for interrupting you.
No, that's absolutely fine. I think for me, it's more of like, we're having these conversations, but how do we move forward? And yes, maybe we might not be able to change, the world in a large scale, but maybe small scale. And I feel that it's not too late if we start with our children. Like I said, half of the time I don't necessarily, kind of push them to be Africans, to be Black out there. It's only, for me, it's a personal reminder to them, you are this. Don't behave like this, you are this. And when I listen to these conversations, I just realize, it does kind of transfer to the outside world, and to the fact that, as Black children, they kind of have this identity together. And the interesting thing is, although they are of different heritage or nationalities, that doesn't seem to come to mind. So I think we do have a chance to achieve unity from this. And again, like Brother Shaka had said, if we keep quiet, we are not helping. Now, I'm thinking, again, with us adults in our workplaces, we're talking about, if you challenge this and you challenge that, then you become known as that difficult person. I don't know about, how the UK, for me, I've been saying this, a lot of things are tick boxes. We talk about culture and identity. How are we meeting your culture? You're not. And if I challenge you or not, then I'm seen as an activist, I'm seen as a difficult person. And I think sometimes I don't do it just for me. I do it so that the children can actually see it is not okay. Challenge it. Now, if we kind of have those conversations with them, and when they're in the playground, whether they are, being dispersed or not, I'll give an example. I think yesterday or the day before, my daughter was complaining that the teacher was saying, you have an attitude, blah, blah, blah. And I said, what happened? And I made a joke. Next time, tell the teacher, listen, I'm Black. We are often mistaken for being confrontational, but that's my voice. And let's see what the teacher will say, And it's giving our children permission. Do this, say this, and wait for them to call me, if you're in detention, for them to have this conversation with me. And it's just giving our children permission, and for us to kind of challenge these things. Although we know it might not change in the next year or two, but it's being on the right path.
Yeah, now African Americans have a really, I would say, on this regard, how do you say, is it Oliver? How do you say your name? Oliver, hello. What's her name? Who was just speaking?
Oliver, sorry, I was muted by the moderator. Yeah, it's Oliver. Although Brother Shabazz, Augustine, I think even yourself preferred to call me by my second name, which is an African name, Mugizi.
I concur. Yes, I concur. I agree with that. And are you of Kenyan descent? Are you from
I'm Tanzanian.
Tanzanian. Okay.
Cousins.
Now, African Americans have a really robust history in terms of education and challenging Eurocentric education. This is just one of, there are probably hundreds of books written by Black folks here in the United States on the situation of Black education. And this was a movement in the United States of Afrocentric schools that happened in the 1970s. Way back in the 1920s, a Black man, Carter G. Woodson, wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Negro, talking about how the Eurocentric schools educational system, impacts Black thinking. So we've been having this conversation for a long time, but what I wanted to say is that you're doing really important work. Your observations are spot on. And part of the problem, part of the challenge is that the white category is normative and unmarked. So when those kids or whoever it is in those schools are feeling uncomfortable because Black people are together, they don't notice that they're together. They're the majority, they're always together, but they don't notice that because it's unmarked, it's normative. And so we have to unsettle what you're doing too, I think, is unsettling the normal, the normalness of whiteness. And that's really crucial to changing this condition that we're in. So I applaud you for that. And I applaud your young folks for doing that work too. Now, you did mention about the biracial thing again. So I do want to say that in the US case, because you had the one drop rule, there was a strong Black identity for mixed race people. For example, you had Booker T. Washington, who Marcus Garvey was actually coming to the United States to meet. He was inspired by his work, but by the time he arrived here, they didn't have jet planes back then. He came on a ship, and Booker T. Washington had died before he arrived here. He also formed one of the earliest HBCUs. So Brother Shock was talking about Black colleges. He started Tuskegee. But in this case, Booker T. Washington had a mixed race wife, and she could pass for white. But if you read his autobiography, Up From Slavery, there's a passage where they talk about, well, why won't you just go to the white side? You could do that easily. And she responds that, I am dedicated to fighting for my people, Black people. I am Black. And so in the United States, because of the one drop rule, mixed race people, or some of them, a lot of them, Du Bois is another one, had a strong Black identity. And that, I say again, was our secret weapon. I know.
May I ask, what did it do for the Black struggle in America? What did these mixed race people actually achieve? What's evident today? And how is it evident today?
You keep calling them mixed race people, but for us, they're a part of the Black group. And with that,
but I understand how you
ask me the question. What did they do? And I'm telling you that.
Wait. I understand. When I refer to them as mixed race people, I only refer to them as mixed race people based on the facts. That's a factual reference to their dual what they inherit through their parents. If one of your parents is of one particular racial group and your other parent is of another particular racial group, you are of mixed race. You inherit what your mother
Akeem, what you have to understand, what you might be missing, Brother Akeem, is that race itself is a construction, right? It's not. It's a thing that we in society have made up to be real. Now, because we in society, because society. Hold on, let me finish.
All right, Colin, you have to minimize because we need to end the webinar. But yeah, go ahead, just briefly.
Yeah. So because society has made up these things, that they have real consequences, right? But it's still a made up thing. And so the fact that someone has a white parent doesn't necessarily predict what path they're going to take. It's not inevitable that they're going to take a certain path because they have white parents.
Okay. Just one question. One quick question.
Okay.
All right, go on. Continue. I'm listening.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm just going to reiterate what the African Researchers Network is all about. Thank you so much to all of our presenters. This has been a very engaging webinar. And so as it has been highlighted earlier, African Researchers Network is it's a Pan-African organization that is deeply committed to academic work, but we also looked at how knowledge production can be used, to our collective liberation, be it on the continent of Africa or in the diaspora. So, and we also prioritize the work of senior and junior colleagues. So thank you so much for being here. I have a couple of announcements to make. One is that we actually have a call for paper that is coming up that is going to it relates to African philosophy. So usually philosophy or African philosophy and religions, not just religion, African religions, it's often being discussed through the lens of non-Africans. So be it non-Africans from the continent, non-Africans from the diaspora. So we have a call for papers that's going to come out shortly in a couple of weeks on that. So we hope some of you could contribute on that. And then on the 16th of July, We have a forthcoming webinar is on hybrid identity and the death of culture. So our speakers, this is going to be a very full house engagement webinar or conversation, pardon me. And we're going to have Mukeli Kasongo, who is going to be from Central Africa, Congo. And then we have Abonga Shitela from South Africa. And then Richard Nialadi from Cameroon, South Africa as well. And then Elizabeth Bradfield from Kenya. And then Ban Ventura from Banventura Muganga and Amarachi Atama. And all of these presenters, we're going to be there for our webinar on July 16th. And we look forward for another engaging webinar. And thank you so much again for being here. And we really appreciate the insightful work that you've given us. We can all turn on unmute yourself and let's give each other a clap. And thank you so much for being here. We have to, we've been here for a long time.
Yeah.
We've been here for a long time. I don't want to go, but I know that there's some of us that, they need to go to address some family issues, etc., or just go and sleep. And so thank you so much. There's some people still trying to get in. We're about to conclude, but thank you so much for being here. This concludes our time together today. And yes.
Brilliant. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank
Brother
you.
Akeem, hit me up, man.
Certainly,
Yes.
please forward my details. I'm in the WhatsApp group.